Well, hi, everybody. This is Bill Brown, and I am so glad that you're here with us. We are going to talk about worldviews. We're going to talk about culture. We're going to talk about cultural flashpoints. We're going to talk about spiritual growth, and we even have a special section for elementary teachers. And I hope that it's going to be a blessing for all of you. You have had an incredible last few months trying to finish up the school year. Some of you did well, some of you struggled, and it's not your fault. It's just one of those things that happen. And I hope that if nothing else, the students and their families will know that you love them and that you care for them and that you're committed to their education and to their spiritual growth. So we'll see how that goes. We're putting this together, as I mentioned earlier, as a gift for you. For those of you who really want some professional development as you go into the school year. And we hope that the things that we share will be a blessing and will be helpful for you. Any feedback that you can give us will be very, very helpful. But we're going to talk about Christian schooling. And of course, when we talk about Christian schools, I have had the blessing to be a part of over 200 Christian schools, speaking at their professional development, at banquets, at spiritual life camps and spiritual life programs, and overseas as well as here in the United States. And it's been awesome. I have met some of the most committed men and women, teachers who love their students and have a vision for the future. And I think that's really what it's all about. I don't talk about Christian schools particularly. Well, I do, but I like the idea that Christian is a noun and not an adjective. And that's why I usually refer to Christian schools as Christ-centered schools, because that's what you are, really, isn't it? You're a gathering, because only people can be Christian. And yet, here you are, you're in this Christ-centered environment, and you have these students. You're going to be growing, and you want the students to grow as well and to go out and make a difference. When I come and speak in a school, I will do a number of things. I will look at the website, try to get an understanding of the people and what's going on at the school, and I'll make special note of the mission statement. And when I'm with everybody, I will say to them, okay, tell me, what is the mission statement of your school? And fortunately, there's usually some who can recite it word for word, and most know at least some elements of it, to the relief of the headmaster. But then I'll say, what is your vision statement? And some schools really don't have a vision statement. A vision statement, of course, is where you want to go. What kind of school do you want to be in 5 years or 10 years? Remember, your mission statement is who are you, what do you do, for whom, and why. Your vision statement is who do you want to become? What kind of school do you want to be? What do you want to be doing then that you can't do now? To have this grand vision, people may say, well, we're just barely surviving. But you don't want to get a grand vision when you're no longer surviving. Think through all of the challenges and let God begin to bless you as you're doing what you're doing. I will also ask the faculty and staff, how do you know if you're fulfilling your mission? How do you know if the mission statement that you say that you are using to guide your school, how do you know that you're fulfilling that? And many of the teachers will say, well, the students will get good grades, or that they behave well, or that they get good scores on their outcome exams, or they get into good colleges, those kinds of things. And I would challenge them, and you know what I'm going to say, so many of you have heard me say this. You will know if you are fulfilling your mission 10 years from now, when you find out your graduates, if they are fulfilling what you wanted them to fulfill, what they're doing what you wanted them to be doing. If they are loving the Lord, if they are following Christ, if they are serving in their community and serving their family, to me, that is what you are all about. After we talk about that, it is often a question among the faculty and staff about why there are so many of their graduates who are no longer following Christ. Some of them blame their family, some of them blame the college that they go to, some of them will blame culture or social media or something like that. But if nothing else, it brings up the realization, are we equipping our students? Are we equipping them for life after high school? And that's an important question. And I think that one way of looking at it is that worldviews actually help quite a bit. And as I talk through our short session today, I hope that you'll see that as well. I got involved in Worldviews during graduate school, and I was in Texas. I was asked to be a pastor of a youth group, and it was a group. There was 3 of them, 2 as a pair, 3 as a group, and I figured I can't mess this up. I'd never been a pastor before, never been any kind of a minister before. I was a math major, and I was doing all kinds of things, working in insurance. And I thought, while I'm here in grad school, Lynn and I can help with this youth group. And I always joked that we had 3 youth, and in 3 months we'd grown to 2, which is wrong. I do have a math degree, and I know that's not the right direction. But over the next year, we saw about 60 kids come to Christ in this small community. It was really, really exciting. Most of them had never been to church, nor had their family, so this was brand new ground for them. And one of the things I found, though, as I got to know them and visiting them in their homes and talking with them at school and their friends, I began to realize that even though they enjoyed being part of a Christian youth group and enjoyed getting into the scriptures, a lot of the choices they were making about life were determined elsewhere. And in fact, many of their choices, they were getting the cues from the entertainment culture, music, and so on. So I decided what we were going to do is take a summer, and I wanted the students to bring in their favorite song by the most influential group in their life. And we would put the words up on the screen. We would listen to the song, and we'd ask questions about the song. What is this song telling me to believe? What is this song telling me to do? What does this song say the good life is? What's the worldview of this song? And how does this song line up to truth? Those kinds of questions. And I didn't know what would happen because this is back in the early 80s, late 70s. And this was relatively new. I had been reading C.S. Lewis and Francis Schaeffer and so on, and come up with the idea of that worldviews were pretty important, and that everybody had one, and so on. And it was amazing what happened to that youth group. As we began to look at these songs and began to discern what the messages were, it was life-changing for many of them. And we spent the whole summer doing that. And some of those songs were pretty embarrassing to bring into a church youth group, but all of them were enlightening. All of them gave us insight into a perpendicular perspective of life in the world that was the antithesis of what we were talking about when we read the scriptures and wanted to follow Jesus Christ. And it transformed the youth group in so many ways. They began to realize that, here's my Christian faith and here's my music and my life. The two shouldn't be so separate. And God did a wonderful work, and we had 7 wonderful years at this particular youth group in church. And it was a blessing for us. We even had a get-together reunion with all those kids just a couple of years ago. And of course, they're up in their 30s and 40s with kids and some grandkids. But nevertheless, it's exciting to see how faithful they are. And they look back at that time as being strategic in their lives. So if you wanted to start with your young people to find out where they are, and you want to introduce worldviews to them, what question would you ask? Well, what question would you ask them to find out where their head is, where their heart is, when it comes to worldviews? This is the question that I would ask. What would be the best life you could have? If you could live anywhere in the world, do anything in the world, have anything in the world, what would it be? What would you have? What would you do? And then kind of an ancillary question is this. If you could be anyone alive now, who would it be? I mean, if you could change places completely with that person, you would become them, who would it be? And I think these are important questions because you notice it's not really getting at the head. Although if I hear the word Kardashian one more time, I'm going to shave my head. But the reality is in all of this is that these are the questions that really give us insight into the mind and the heart of young people today. And I'm really surprised, I shouldn't be, but really surprised at the number of kids who are wonderful Christians as young people, but when they're asked a question like this, whatever dreams they have for the future or whatever person they want to become usually have nothing to do with faith, nothing to do with Christ, nothing to do with spiritual development and growth, and so on. But that's where their heart is. And it's no wonder that many will go through and get great grades in Bible, be very active in ministry, be student leaders. And then they get out, and after a year or maybe a week in college, they have jettisoned their faith. And maybe not actively turn their back on it, but it's certainly not a priority for them anymore. That's why I think worldviews and good biblical instruction can really make a difference if done well. And we'll talk about that here. Let me give you a perspective from a young man that I think a lot of. His name is Trip Lee. Trip is a pastor now, but he's also an incredible rapper. If you like rap music, you'll love him. He's exceptionally good. In fact, he and Lecrae have done some things together that are just really, really good. But in his book, The Good Life, he's talking about when in his younger life, when he was listening to a particular album by Jay-Z. And there's a song on there by Jay-Z and Jiggy, and this is what he has to say about it. He said, "Yes, I had the clean version, so my ears were shielded from the foul language, but not from all harm. There's no edited version that removes worldviews. They were lecturing me about what my aspirations should be and what is most important in the world. I was a star pupil. I ate it up. I wanted the good life. I needed the money, the cars, and the girls." Notice Tripp first points out that the lyrics of the song, and actually every song, can be clean if offensive words are removed or replaced. This supposedly makes them harmless to impressionable people, particularly youth. Second, and more importantly, he points out that songs express and promote a worldview. In fact, every song, every television show, every movie, every commercial, every book is telling us what's important in life, how we should live, how we should choose. And sometimes we forget. We don't realize that. We look for clues about what their view of God is, what their view of the Bible is, or what their view of heaven and hell is, and so on, without realizing that the most dynamic and instructive and sometimes destructive part of any artifact of entertainment is what it says about life. He points out that in the song, Jay-Z and Jiggy are explaining the good life to listeners, and it is cars, money, and girls. Clearly a naturalistic worldview expressed by materialism, hedonism, sexuality, and so on. And see, these are more heart issues and physical and emotional desires than worldview thinking. Now, that doesn't exclude worldview thinking, but nevertheless, it's a place where we often forget when we are considering teaching worldviews. But just think how so many Christian leaders who have fallen away from their positions because of immorality, abuse of power, or other moral failings, all of them could have aced a Bible exam and got 100% on the Barna Biblical Worldview survey. But the flaws in their hearts, the flaws in their minds, their attitudes and actions betrayed where their heart really was. And God addresses both the mind and the heart, the will, the conscience, where the truths of a biblical worldview ignite the heart and the mind. A reminder that your teaching, of course, as you've heard, is not just filling a bucket, it's lighting a fire. But let's start at the very beginning of what worldviews are. I don't know if you've ever seen this picture. I think this is great. This is the Indonesian soccer team, their football team. And they had just scored a goal. And three other players stand side by side, thanking deity for the blessings of scoring this goal. You have the Buddhist on the left, the Christian in the middle, the Muslim on the right. And that's really what we have, don't we? We have parallel worldviews. Many times we have a collision of worldviews as well. And being able to articulate what those differences are is so important, at least at the intellectual level. The heart will follow. Sometimes the heart starts it all. But nevertheless, the two have to converge. But you need to have the mental perspective as well. Lynn and I were in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. I was speaking there. And we went and visited some friends at the Mercy Medical Center, which is a wonderful, wonderful Christian hospital in Phnom Penh, on the outskirts of Phnom Penh. They have tens of thousands of people come to see them each year. They treat. They have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them coming to Jesus Christ. They've had thousands over the years that they've been there. And they give the best of medical services, and it is Christ-centered in a Buddhist country, in a country that is just still struggling so much from the Khmer Rouge, struggling so much with hope in the midst of such despair. And it was a blessing to see them. And we went and had dinner with someone, and you're on the top of their house because it's cooler up there. And we're looking out across Phnom Penh. And I noticed Mercy Medical Center off to one side of the city. Across the way was the largest Wat, the largest Buddhist temple in the country there as well. And then further out from the city were the killing fields. The killing fields where 1/4 of the entire population were murdered by the communist Khmer Rouge under Pol Pot. 1975, 1979, horrible, horrible years. That horror still is part of the DNA of that country. And I told Lynn, here's a great example. Here are 3 worldviews that we're looking at in the city of Phnom Penh. The theistic, actually the Christian theism of Mercy Medical Center. The transcendentalism or the cosmic humanism of Buddhism. And then the horror of naturalism and then the communistic form of it in the Khmer Rouge and the killing fields. We have a saying at the Colson Center, which is this: ideas have consequences, bad ideas have victims. That is nowhere truer and anywhere than we look at worldviews. So what is a worldview? A worldview is 3 things. It's an explanation. It's an explanation of the world. It tells us how the world got here. It tells us where the world is going. It tells us why we are here, what we're supposed to be doing, and where we are going. It's the way you talk about and explain the world. Secondly, you take that explanation and that becomes the lens through which you interpret the world around you. You see an event like 9/11. And as a Christian, you would interpret what happened through the lens of your Christian worldview. If you are, let's say, a jihadist Muslim, you would interpret it differently. And if you're an atheist, you would interpret it differently. Your worldview serves as the lens through which you interpret events, not only on the big scale, but in your own personal life as well. And thirdly, and just as importantly, your worldview is an application. You apply it to life. You live it out all the time. And if you're consistent, your worldview will be very evident by how you live your life, what you say about life, the priorities and preferences you have in the world. Now, teaching worldview cannot replace teaching the Bible. Don't ever think that that's true. Students need to know the content of the Bible. They need to possess the tools to understand the content of the Bible and to have the heart and the will to apply the content of the Bible for a lifelong relationship with the God of the Word. The Word of God drives us to the God of the Word. But worldviews give us the social and global context to understand that every person is seeking to make sense of the world. It's not just, here we are Christians and here's the rest of the world, the ungodly world, the dark world. But rather, we see every person precious in God's sight, every person seeking to make sense of the world in one way or another. Even more, to see God and His Word in context of the world, so we can understand it, so that we can live it, so that we can communicate it naturally and effectively. I was speaking to a group of about 50 educational leaders, and from all walks of life. And I was just talking through the 3 major worldviews. I pointed out everybody has a worldview. You live out your worldview. It's the basis for your life. And here are the 3 major worldviews. Very, very simple, very, very elementary, actually. Afterwards, the educators came up just absolutely overwhelmed. In fact, the dean of one of the most prominent law schools in the nation, one of the top 10 law schools in the nation, came up to me and he said, "Bill, that was mesmerizing." Now, that is not necessarily a compliment to me. It just shows that thinking worldviewishly for many is brand new. It's a different way of thinking, but it's a wonderful, holistic way of thinking. And your kids may not come up to you and say, "Oh, Ms. Jones, that was mesmerizing." But if nothing else, you're going to be helping them form categories to be able to understand the world around them so they can not only understand, but begin to communicate to them in ways that really, really matter. 4 truths about worldviews. First, everyone has a worldview, or actually a worldview has them. I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. It's part and parcel of being a human. Everybody tries to make sense of the world. It's who we are. Animals do not do that, but we do. We do, because for a number of reasons. And let me give you some of those reasons. I'll give you biblical reasons. There are some philosophical reasons I think are important too, but let me just focus on 3 biblical reasons. The first one is that we are made in God's image. Unlike the animals, God created us in his image and likeness. And we read that in Genesis 1:27. And that image and likeness, in fact, this one passage sets the foundation really for the rest of scriptures on how we're to be looking at people. Not only other believers, but people outside the faith as well. They too are created in the image and likeness of God. And that's important. That means that we have a purpose for our existence. That means that we have a spiritual nature. And just as God was creating, we can be creative as well. We can create things that never existed before, like a beautiful painting, a symphony, or Luke Skywalker. And every person created in the image and likeness of God is precious. I had a friend who went to India, to Calcutta, he and his son, and they were walking through the streets with somebody that they had just met. And they saw, as far as the eye could see, these hovels just on the outskirts of the city where people lived under cardboard and tin. There were bodies around, and Steve didn't know if it were people who were alive or people who were dead. And he looked at his new friend and said, "Who takes care of these people? Do the Hindus take care of these people?" And the Hindu said, "No, the Hindus believe that these people are getting what they deserve. Karma. This is their karmic existence in this lifetime." And then he said, "Well, do the Muslims take care of these people?" And his friend said, "No, the Muslims think these people deserve it. They're the scum of the earth." "Well, then who takes care of these people?" Steve said. And he said, this guy stopped and turned to him and said, "The Christians. Only the Christians." And that's a wonderful worldview perspective and statement, isn't it? And I began to realize that being a Christian is more than just saying that you affirm certain things to be true, but that the reality of those truths of being made in the image and likeness of God makes us dignify other people. The early church, as you know, took care of the plague victims. They went in, and many Christians by the thousands died, but they died happy, said the historians, because they knew where they were going. They were called by God to serve. Many Christians rescued babies that were left out to die of exposure or starvation because the babies were unwanted. A second reason we have a worldview is that we can transcend our lives. And I love this passage, and you do too, Ecclesiastes 3:11. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. In other words, God has put not only image and likeness within us, but within our hearts there's this sense of eternity. Now, the animals don't have this sense of eternity, but we do. We understand what forever, forever, forever might mean. And that changes everything. We're able to get outside ourselves and look at ourselves and look at the world and look at the world historically and be able to see things as if we were outside looking in. That ability is amazing. That self-awareness and awareness of the world around us is something that is a special gift from God. We are enchanted, as many philosophers, Christian philosophers say. The world is enchanted. We are enchanted. When I was president at a university, on Sunday afternoon, some of the students would come over and we'd watch football. And there'd be a dozen or so. And the basketball team was pretty good at coming over because Lynn had great snacks. But one particular day we were watching a late game, and it was halftime So time to go get pizza. So let's go get pizza. So about 4 of the basketball players and I jumped into what was then a little car. I don't know how we fit, but we're going up, and this is in East Tennessee now. We're going up the road, and one of the guys yelled, "Stop!" So I stopped the car, and these guys piled out, and they looked. And there was the Cumberland Plateau. The sky was on fire with the most beautiful East Tennessee sunset. And those guys stood there and went, "Oh, wow." There were some squirrels in the trees and some birds and one deer. And none of them were looking at the sunset. But we were. What is it about the beauty of a sunset that connects with us some sense of what beauty is? I can tell you, I studied math and physics at the university, and I can tell you what the sky on fire is all about. It's just a refraction of the infrared part of the light spectrum through the atmosphere. No big deal. But it's beautiful. Why? What is that? What does it evoke within us? That transcendence that we have for beauty and miracle and magic and mystery, all of those things are a part of the way that God has made us. And it's one of the ways in which God, I think, leads us to Him. We can transcend ourselves. And a third reason that we have a worldview is that we possess this innate moral compass. And probably the most well-known passage on this is Romans 2:15, where Paul's describing the Gentiles and their moral law. And they were saying that the Jews were saying, well, they don't have the law to follow. And Paul goes on to say, well, the Gentiles show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts. I was being interviewed on a radio program by a fellow who's an atheist. It's an atheist radio program. I like being on those shows, by the way. And he said to me, you Christians, you think that you need God to be moral. Well, my wife is an atheist, and she is the most moral person I have ever met. And I said, well, you realize, don't you, that whether you believe in God or not, how He created us, that the moral law is imprinted on the heart of every person. And he sat there and looked at me for a long time. And he began to realize that the Christian worldview can encompass morality, even of atheists, because we all share in that likeness of God, particularly that moral likeness. And it's because we have these three abilities, God's likeness and this transcendence and this moral law, that drives us to try to make sense of everything that we are experiencing. And this is why worldviews come right to the fore of our lives. Everyone has a worldview, number one. And number two, second point is your worldview is how you answer the ultimate questions of life. I think this is pretty cool. Here's a good quote from a guy by the name of Shia LaBeouf. He is an actor, as everybody knows. His movies have made hundreds of millions of dollars, and he's quite active in, let's just say, in doing strange things publicly. But he's one of those celebrities that I pray for almost on a daily basis to come to Christ and for God to send people into his life. But notice what he says in this interview with Parade magazine. He says, sometimes I feel like I'm living a meaningless life and I get frightened. I have no idea where this insecurity comes from, but it's a God-sized hole. If I knew I'd fill it, I'd be on my way. I have no answers to anything, none. Why am I an alcoholic? I haven't a clue. What is life about? I don't know. The best I can do is learn from my mistakes and move forward, and that's what I'm trying to do. Isn't that a statement that's just chock full of worldview issues? Having a God-sized hole, and of course, if you have a God-sized hole, what fills the hole? I'm hoping that he will realize that and come to Christ. But when we think about that, ultimate questions are questions that everybody answers in one way or another. People really don't realize that they're answering these questions by the way that they live. And they're found in four major categories: origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. And I use these, and of course, Ravi Zacharias used these as well. Bless his heart. Thank you for his wonderful legacy for all of us. Where did everything come from? How you answer that question puts everything on a trajectory. If you say there's no God, then the other questions really will follow that atheistic perspective. If you say there is a God, then the other questions will follow along. Meaning, why are we here? This is the most important question people want to ask USA Today did a survey, and they asked people, if you could ask God one question, what would you ask him? And the number one question was, why am I here? Why am I here? Morality, how should we live? Who decides? And then destiny, where is everything going? And more particularly, what happens when I die? These are ultimate questions. And really, your worldview is formed by how you answer these particular questions. In fact, they fall into three major categories. The first is naturalism, the belief that everything is natural, nothing is supernatural. Everything is physical, nothing is metaphysical. This is the view of the atheists, for example. There is no God. We'll talk more about this in our next session. The idea of transcendentalism, the worldview which says that everything is God and that we are part of all of that. There is no separation between God and us. God and the material world, we are all one. This is often called cosmic humanism, a phrase I like better than transcendentalism, but transcendentalism has become the word that we use, and so we'll continue that. And then the idea of theism, that there is a God who created everything, brought us into existence, and we are dependent to him, and he has communicated to us. And that includes not only Christianity, but Judaism and Islam as well. Now, those worldviews, they're handy because they show us how they all fit together and how they are answering the same kinds of questions. A third truth about worldviews. Thinking from a worldview perspective helps the world make sense. Why? Because you're comparing apples to apples. What do you believe about God? What do you believe about destiny? What is the meaning of life? By how you answer that, you can compare and contrast responses to that. And it's helpful to be able to do that. But it allows you also to step into the shoes of those people who believe differently than you do, and maybe understand why they are holding to a particular belief. And then that understanding, you can have compassion, and maybe God will give you some real insight and creativity in being able to communicate Christ to them. Let me give you an example. Here's a picture of a big guy and a little woman sitting in a chair. No big deal, right? Well, if you take 3 steps to the right, this is what you see. So I ask you this question: which one of these pictures is the correct one? Most people will say, well, the one on the right, because the one on the left is an illusion. Well, I say actually that both of them are correct, right? It just depends on your perspective. And in many ways, as people are trying to make sense of the world around them, they're answering the same questions, but some are doing it one way, some are doing it another way. It doesn't quite fit. What fits the evidence best, I think, without a doubt, is Christianity. And we need to be able to articulate that. We need to be able to communicate that passionately. We need to be able to commend that by how we live. And here's another example. Here's a little boy in the snow. I would have students write several paragraphs of what's going on here. There's not enough evidence to really see much, is there? There's got to be a story here, because here's a boy in the snow. And then I say, okay, here's more of the picture. Some of the students felt that the boy was in peril, that there was some kind of snowdrift or avalanche or whatever, and he was stuck. But now that they see, no, he's playing in the snow, and there are other children playing in the snow with him. But when you get more information to give you more insight into a particular issue, you usually get more questions. And that's what's happening here. This raises even more questions. And then when you see the full picture, you see that here he is, here they are in Honolulu, outside of Honolulu, Hawaii Kai at the church. And then now you've got a lot of questions, because you realize he's in Oahu, on the southeast corner of Oahu, and there's snow there. It doesn't snow in Oahu. And they're at this church. What is going on here? And so you've got more questions to find. But that happens all the time, isn't it? The more you learn, the more questions you have. And that's why we can't wait until we're with the Lord, and we will know even as we are fully known, right? Well, this is their, their vacation Bible school in the summer, and they bring in snow for the kids. Most have never seen it and played in it, and it's a big deal. It lasts about 20 minutes, but whatever. This is fun for them. All right, 4th point. Your worldview is your declaration of what is most important in your life. Let this triangle represent your life, everybody's life. At the basis is your worldview, how you see the world. Based upon that are your values, the things that are priorities and preferences to you. Why are these important to you? Because that's how you see the world, how you handle your money, how you handle your time, how you deal with your relationships, and so on. And then, of course, the very top of that is behavior, how you respond, how you act. And in many ways, how you act opens up people to understand what your values are. They're clearly seen. And because you have these values, you have this worldview. You put Christian at the bottom, and you can think of Christian values and Christian behavior. You can think of atheist at the bottom. It's a little more difficult because it's much wider than the Christian perspective. But you see the idea of how these go together. So the worldview is at the basis of your life. So we're going to close up here. Educational goals. What kinds of things do you want to see in the lives of your kids? First, to know and to understand the Christian worldview. Yes, the Bible, but also the Christian worldview. They should know what it is and what it isn't. And they should understand the meaning of all of it. They should understand that when Christ came, he dignified humanity. And even though we are fallen, yes, but he became one of us, and that's important. He came and he died and he rose again. That means death is not the end. That death is not a period, it's a comma. And that changes everything. And once they understand that, it is transformative, it is life-changing, and it is motivating to live for the Lord for what he has for us. But also to know and understand other worldviews. We need to know the point of conflict and the point of contact to be able to know what they're saying and why, so that you can give a good answer. The Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, I make myself a slave to everyone in order that I may win them. In other words, I want to get inside their hearts and their heads so that I can build a bridge to Jesus for them. And thirdly, to communicate knowledge and understanding, not only for them to know that and to be able to articulate that, but to be able to communicate it to other people. I would give assignments for students to find worldviews in a USA Today and so on, to write a paper, to write an article, to write a letter and so on. In other words, they're dealing in a secular sense, worldviews, which are everywhere all around us, so that they begin to recognize them, so that they can be able to articulate what is being believed, and that they can be able to present a message of the gospel to people. And then, of course, finally, living out the Christian worldview, which is the most important. We'll talk more about that later. So, personal spiritual goals for the kids are this: to see the world through God's eyes and love it with his heart. Secondly, to weep for those outside Christ, family, friends, celebrities, leaders, and to be praying for them because they don't know God's gift of grace. And then finally, to have their hearts broken over those who are poor, those who are broken themselves, those who are discriminated, the least among these, because that's what Christians do. Well, I hope that you're going to enjoy this series. I hope that as more and more speakers come along and are able to encourage you and give you insights on what it means to be a follower of Christ and to be an educator, that you're going to be motivated, and that God is going to fill your heart and your mind with good things for your kids. We are praying for you and are grateful for this opportunity to spend some time with you. God bless you. So long.